Hey friends, so yesterday I was reading something about how the WWE, the wrestling company, right? So they have a page on Wikipedia. Well, there is a page on Wikipedia about the WWE and the list of its personnel, and it is now the most updated, edited page on Wikipedia. It used to be George Bush, and WWE has now overtaken it, which is what it is, right? And there have been several articles written about it, and I went looking it up, and there were people who were writing about it even before it became number one. And one of the posts I saw, and I saw multiple posts saying this, which is that oh, I didn't know that Wikipedia editors were such WWE fans. Like, that's surprising. I wouldn't have expected that. And then they just kind of left it. And this troubles me. One of these posts was like on a website/blog that prides itself on being data driven and being kind of data analyticsy. Like, we look at the numbers and we tell you what the truth is based on these numbers, and like it's obviously a kind of wrong takeaway to take from that data. And to me, what's obvious is that, and I guess I have some background knowledge, which is that there is a WWE community, a wrestling community internationally, on Reddit, on forums, wherever, very, very passionate about WWE, and so they keep track of everything that's happening. Every time the roster changes, they want to have it updated. And so don't you think it's obviously more accurate to say that there is a subset of WWE fans who are passionate enough about the WWE that they go on Wikipedia and they edit these pages, rather than assume that there is this nebulous, not even nebulous, there is this kind of entity known as the person who edits Wikipedia, and this person, this kind of generalized person, edits all the pages on Wikipedia. Or like there's one kind of person that I just this false impression that there's one kind of Wikipedia editor. It's obviously false to me. And it worries me that people make this mistake, and it's a description of there's this quote by Michael Crichton, the guy who wrote Andromeda Strain and Jurassic Park, I think. And he talks about gel man amnesia, and he talks about, which is a phenomenon where you read the newspaper and you read an article that happens to be about some topic that you are familiar with, right? And then you see that the person writing it doesn't really understand what they're talking about. So they're just putting together all the facts, they're putting together all the information that they have, but they don't really know how to make sense of the information, and yet they don't tell you that they don't understand. They kind of just lay it out in a way that seems to make sense. And if you understand the topic, the subject matter, you will realize that it's got it wrong. And Michael Crichton describes this as wet streets cause rain stories, meaning like, you see wet streets, you report on the wet streets, and then you think that, oh, it's raining and there are wet streets, therefore the wet streets must be causing the rain, right? Which is obviously false. But there are many other things about things that are not so obvious, where they might say, I don't know, inflation causes this outcome, when it might be the other way around. I'm not claiming to know what it is, but it's this understanding of causality that's incredibly kind of poorly dealt with, even by people who are supposedly experts, journalists, important people, blah blah blah. And I worry about this, and so I felt like making a video about it to talk about how I deal with it. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I try to be rigorous in my thinking, and I kind of have this subconscious machinery built up from years of writing, arguing with people, introspecting, reviewing my claims and arguments. And over time, you kind of develop a certain hygiene practice, like intellectual hygiene, like thinking clearly. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about thinking clearly. And I think, you don't necessarily need to be super well informed about everything to learn to think clearly. In fact, you can just kind of practice reversing. So when two things happen, like, so the famous story in fiction is like the king died and the queen died, and then it's like the king died and then the queen died of grief. And the first is, I can't remember details, second is plot, something like that. But the point is that events are happening all the time. And when I say event, I mean like in the cosmic sense, or like, like it's raining, or the moon is spinning around the earth, or there's something's happening. Events are always happening, and sometimes events happen at the same time, sometimes events happen one after the other. And the human brain, I guess, is we are wired to be narrative thinkers, and we infer stories we infer causality all the time, even when it isn't there. And I think that's like I haven't read Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb, but that's basically the idea, right? Like things can happen, and it's always very tempting to come up with the reasons for why things happen, but your reasons could be wrong, and you may not know that your reason is wrong until some different event happened that your explanation doesn't sufficiently account for. So right now in the stock market, right, I'm not an investor, but it seems like basically every freaking stock has been going up for the past, I don't know, 5 years or so, like broadly, right? Like we're in a, what do they call it, a bull market? I'm not sure, but like, you may come up with some personal narrative to explain for why some particular stock is doing well, but you don't know if that's true per se unless you rigorously test that narrative against every other possible narrative. And it's not actually it's not really possible for you to test every single narrative, but you can kind of get a progressively better sense by testing it against the main prevailing narratives and the main kind of counter narratives. So like with the WWE example, it's like, what if it's the other way? So like generally, I think whenever you explain something as this causes that, it's always worth asking, what if it was the other way around? What if, and if you do that and it still seems to make sense, like if you say wet streets causes rain and rain causes wet streets, and they both seem to make sense to you, it means that you don't understand the phenomenon. You don't understand what rain actually is, and you don't understand how it actually works. And that should cause a bit of alarm or concern, that you should examine it more closely, and you should investigate the relationship between the two things, and like what is rain exactly, right? What is water? I mean, you can kind of go off the rails with this, and I did go off the rails several times as a kid, and I think it's almost necessary. Like you kind of want to, you have to make a few mistakes to understand, like, okay, that's way too abstract and it's not helping me solve the problem that I'm trying to solve. And are you trying to solve problems, or are you just trying to have fun? If you're just trying to have fun, you can go wild, right? And yeah, I described in somewhere else that if you want to understand how a car works, like rather than while it can be interesting to accidentally end up studying material science and understanding like aluminum and I don't know, what was steel and whatnot, right? Wheels, rubber, where does rubber come from? It comes from these trees. How do these trees grow? How do they transport the lumber, and how do they tap the rubber from the trees? And now you're studying how rubber is tapped from trees, but actually you got to learn how to drive a car because you have a car thing to drive. I don't know. For some reason you need to understand how a car works, and it can be interesting to understand what the different kinds of tires do and blah blah blah, all those details. But life is limited. You have limited time, and so sometimes you want to explore your curiosity in any direction that it leads you, and that's worthwhile in the sense that it helps you become sensitive to your taste. And I have a separate video about taste. But if you have a task that needs doing, then you need to know why that task matters. And then, okay, after that, I tend to talk about how to understand how a car works, figure out how cars stop working, right? So Google like common car problems and look up like a mechanic website that says, oh, your your brake fluid is not working. Like you've run out of brake fluid. Oh, so what does brake fluid do? Or the carburetor, the batteries run out. Oh, why do batteries run out? Because the batteries are meant to power this. I'm not a car guy. I don't have a car. I don't drive, but I know how I would find out things if I wanted to find things out. And that gives me a sense of comfort and confidence about things that I don't understand even. I'm not saying that I know how to do things that I don't understand, but I know how I would approach a thing that I don't understand, which is to figure out what are the things that you're trying to do, figure out the relationships between the elements of what it is, and what works, what doesn't work, what breaks, what doesn't break. I have a thread on Twitter about how I learn music. And I'm like almost completely self-taught. I mean, I read what other people have written, and these days there are YouTube videos where I can watch what other people kind of describe and follow it. But I've never had like a one-to-one music tutor kind of sitting down and showing me stuff. Maybe like I've sat with friends and they've taught me some little things, but for the most part, like most of my music study has been entirely on my own. And the first thing you can learn when you pick up a guitar or sit at a piano is that you just press the notes and like, oh, some of the notes on this side are lower sounding and some of these notes on this side are higher sounding, right? So that's the first thing you learn about music, which is that there are different sounds and some are low and some are high, right? Like, and that kind of thing goes on. And then you just kind of, okay, why do these, like, if you're on the piano and you play all the black notes, all the black notes sound harmonious together. Why is that? You may not know why, you may not figure that out precisely immediately, but it's a thing that you know now, and you collect a bunch of things that you know until you kind of feel like you know a lot of things, and it's a kind of burdensome list because you don't know how to make sense of it. And then you start looking for patterns across the things that you know, and then you find out that a few different things that I thought were different things are all the same thing expressed in different ways. And then you have this sense of synthesis, and wow, that feeling is really, it's a feeling of ecstasy. Once you've had it, you seek it constantly in everything, because it's the feeling of understanding. Okay, I'm going to end this video here. I have a separate video about how I think about thinking, and I guess I'll link that in the description. And done for now.